Good afternoon, Madam Deputy High Commissioner, distinguished colleagues. The Republic of Korea is pleased to co-organize this event with OHCC HR. I would like to extend my sincere appreciation to Australia, Japan, Peru, Thailand, and the UK and Vietnam for joining us as co-sponsors. I would like to take this opportunity to thank the distinguished panelists who have agreed to share their expertise, experience, and insights in today's important discussion on online scams, whether in person or virtually. As many of you in this room already aware, while digital technologies have created unprecedented opportunities for connectivity and innovation, they have also been increasingly exploited to facilitate emerging human rights violations and abuses, such as online scams. In this regard, His Excellency Volker Turk, UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, has indicated that trafficking in persons and forced labor associated with online scam centers have become a serious human rights concern. However, we believe that the severity of this issue has not yet been fully recognized by the international community, including the Human Rights Council as the main body for the promotion and protection for human rights worldwide. In this context, ROK government has been actively engaging in international efforts to address the transnational impact of online scams, calling for a stronger, more coordinated global response to this matter. Building on the joint statement on combating technology-facilitated trafficking in persons led by the Republic of Korea in New York in November last year, we remain committed to continuing these efforts here in Geneva. We also take note of OHR's recent publication on online scams, which examines the root causes of this phenomenon and call for strengthened international cooperation to address it in a timely manner. Against this backdrop, we look forward to hearing valuable perspectives from the relevant special rapporteurs, as well as experts from OHR and the EOS Collective, a civil society organization with a specialized expertise that has long been actively engaged on this issue. Distinguished colleagues, in closing, I hope that today's discussion will serve as a platform for constructive and fruitful dialogue on awareness raising, international cooperation, and accountability in addressing these emerging challenges. I once again thank all distinguished participants for dedicating their valuable time and energy to this event during this busy session. I now give the floor to Madam Deputy High Commissioner.
Thank you, dear Ambassador, Excellencies, distinguished panelists, and colleagues and friends. This is indeed a timely and very important discussion on the human rights impacts of online scam operations and the need to address their global rise through, as you just heard, the Ambassador called for already, stronger international cooperation. Reports collected by OHCHR suggest that hundreds of thousands of people from 66 countries across all regions have been trafficked into scam operations, where they are forced to carry out online fraud, including some things that we know very well, the romance scams, the fake investment schemes, cryptocurrency fraud, all of which totals around $64 billion in losses for people around the world. There are two sets of victims involved in these terrible practices. Perhaps we are more familiar with those targeted by the scams, but there are also those who are forced to perpetrate them. And we face an evolving crisis at the intersection of digital crime, systematic human rights abuses, human trafficking, and contemporary forms of slavery. And despite robust evidence of patterns of serious human rights abuses, including forced labor, torture, and ill treatment, most people who are coerced into scam operations remain unrecognized as victims. Instead, they are often treated as immigration offenders or as criminals for acts committed as a consequence of their trafficking. Thousands of survivors, many of whom remain deeply traumatized, have been unable to access screening and protection services. They have been arrested or detained, or they have been returned to their home countries where they often face risks of re-trafficking or reprisals. This exposes profound gaps in protection and accountability. Our office is therefore urging that all efforts to address online scam operations and to break the business model of these horrendous practices involve a victim-centered and human rights-based approach that places the rights, the dignity, the safety, and the well-being of survivors forced to work in such operations at the core. First, individuals who are trafficked into these operations and who have suffered serious human rights abuses must be clearly recognized as victims in law and practice. That's through early screening, identification procedures, and frameworks that fully operationalize the non-punishment principle. Second, access to protection and assistance must be strengthened, including timely and comprehensive rescue efforts, adequate and safe shelter, trauma-informed medical and psychological care, legal assistance, and rehabilitation and reintegration support. There is especially urgent need for such measures in situations that involve the large-scale release of people from scam operations. And third, prevention must be strengthened. We spend too much time dealing with the consequences. Really, what you need to do is look at survivor-led and community-centered approach that go beyond the generic awareness-raising efforts, as our recent research highlights from the UN Human Rights Office. Your Excellencies, dear friends, online scams are not just financial crimes against those they target. They represent a human rights catastrophe for those who are being forced to perpetrate them. While effective prosecution of criminal networks is vital, it's critical, it's the backbone, but we also need a rights-based response that calls at the same time for the protection of journalists and civil society members who raise attention to the challenge, along with robust efforts to eradicate corruption and the impunity for those who oversee and administer those networks. Our office calls for immediate coordinated action from governments. As we just heard from the ambassador, this is governments and businesses and international organizations coming together to end this form of modern slavery and to provide victims with adequate protection, with rehabilitation support, and ultimately with justice. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy High Commissioner, for your valuable remarks. Okay, so we have a very limited time, so let's move into the panel discussion. I'm delighted to welcome all distinguished experts who will provide their valuable insights on this topic. First of all, I now have the honor to invite the first panelist, Mr. Tomoya Obokata, Special Rapporteur on Contemporary Forms of Slavery. Mr. Tomokata, you have the floor.
Great. Well, Excellencies and distinguished delegates, I'd like to begin by thanking Ambassador Yoon and the Republic of Korea for organizing this timely event on online scamming and also for inviting myself. My gratitude also goes to co-sponsors of this particular event. Now, last year, myself, my colleague, Special Rapporteur on Human Trafficking, and on Cambodia, jointly issued a statement stressing that human trafficking for forced scamming in Southeast Asia has reached a level of a humanitarian and human rights crisis. And 1 year later, the situation still remains quite serious. As highlighted by the Deputy High Commissioner, victims are trafficked not only from the region itself, but also from Africa, Middle East, and Latin America. We also need to consider secondary victims of online fraud who are located in all regions of the world. The problem, therefore, has become a truly global in scope. Victims are often deceived into traveling with promises of high-paid jobs, but once they arrive, they are transported to scam compounds located in multiple jurisdictions in Southeast Asia. Trafficked victims may not necessarily fit the typical victim profiles. Many are highly educated with university degrees, with sufficient knowledge and experience in computer and digital technology. And many are also multilingual. Within these scam compounds, they are forced to work long hours without breaks, and many have reportedly experienced the threat or use of physical, psychological, and sexual violence, including torture and removal of their organs when they refuse to work, do not meet daily targets, or try to escape. In some cases, these instances of ill treatments of victims by criminals are so severe, widespread, and systematic that they could amount to crimes against humanity, including enslavement, severe deprivation of physical liberty, and torture. Those who manage to escape also find themselves stranded without identity documents, food, shelter, medical care, or access to legal protection. Current assistance frameworks remain fragmented and insufficient to meet the scale of the needs. Consequently, survivors often face detention, deportation, reprisals from trafficking networks. In terms of perpetrators, the involvement of highly sophisticated organized criminal groups of Chinese origin has been widely reported, but in reality, criminals do come from other countries in the region and beyond, including, for example, Japan and the Republic of Korea. Given the seriousness of this issue, we jointly issued communications last year to multiple countries in the region, as well as the regional body ASEAN, in order to solicit responses and promote constructive dialogue. I would like to thank stakeholders, including our OHCHR colleagues here in Geneva and the Bangkok Regional Office, for providing information and guidance in developing these communications. I would also like to thank those governments which already have responded and would encourage others to do so, as these communications provide them an opportunity to showcase positive steps being taken to address trafficking for forced scamming. In terms of obligations under international human rights law, states must, of course, investigate, prosecute, and punish traffickers and exploiters to begin with. And I would like to acknowledge that states in the region are taking firm actions in recent times. One example is the arrests and extradition of the president of Prince Group and his associates from Cambodia to China, who have allegedly been behind large-scale scamming operations in the country. Also, Cambodia and the Republic of Korea have set up task force to conduct law enforcement operations since last year, and this has resulted in identification and repatriation of a large number of Korean nationals who have been involved in various crimes. Similar coordination and cooperation has been facilitated by other governments, including Thailand and Japan, as well as Vietnam. These examples of bilateral cooperation represent a step in the right direction when conducted in line with the existing international human rights standards. However, it is clear that more needs to be done. For instance, running such a large-scale and highly sophisticated operation would not be possible without active collusions of public and law enforcement officials, and therefore states in the region should intensify their efforts in fighting corruption. In addition, member states in the region and beyond should follow the illegal process more rigorously, as this is one of the most effective ways to dismantle criminal organizations. This means, among others, that along with criminal investigations, financial investigations should be conducted simultaneously to trace illegal processes. And as soon as they are identified, it is important to freeze or confiscate them. And here I'd like to acknowledge that there are some good examples already. The freezing of assets of the Prince Group has already been executed by governments of the United Kingdom, United States of America, Hong Kong, and Singapore. Confiscated proceeds should be, of course, returned to the fraud victims, but also be used to protect the victims who have suffered gross violations of human rights. Finally, as highlighted by Ambassador Yoon and the Deputy High Commissioner, given that online scamming is committed in digital environments with the use of modern technology, including the artificial intelligence, All member states must ensure that their legal frameworks are up to date and law enforcement officials are properly trained to be able to address evolving threats. I also urge them to ratify the UN Convention Against Cybercrime, which provides a legal basis to facilitate international cooperation. Further, the states should establish collaborative working relationship with technology companies and promote human rights due diligence among them, preferably a mandatory version in line with the United Nations Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights and global trend. Thank you very much. I'll stop here and I look forward to a further discussion. Thank you, Ambassador.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Special Rapporteur, for your excellent overview of the discussion. Your presentation helped us to understand the overall picture of this online scam case and your development of the recent the online scam cases. Now I invite Ms. Siobhan Mullally, a special rapporteur on trafficking in persons. So, Madam, you have the floor.
Thank you, Ambassador Yoon, Deputy High Commissioner, Excellencies, distinguished guests. Thank you very much to the co-organisers and to all of the co-sponsors for today's event. This is a really important opportunity to keep this very serious human rights violation and serious crime on the agenda of states, of civil society and all human rights actors. I'm very pleased to have the opportunity to highlight the human rights impact of online scamming as a form of trafficking for forced criminality. And as has been highlighted in the most recent global report on human trafficking, forced criminality is a rapidly growing and really complex form of human trafficking that poses really serious human rights challenges and challenges us as to how we can respond effectively to prevent this serious human rights violation, to combat it occurring, but also to ensure a victim-centered approach, a human rights-based approach to assist and protect victims and to ensure accountability. This was an urgent issue that was addressed at the recent high-level meeting of the Global Plan of Action on Human Trafficking in New York in November, which takes place every 4 years, and at the side event in New York that was led by the Permanent Mission of the Republic of Korea, which attracted cross-regional engagement and responses. Again, it will be the topic of the upcoming OSCE high-level meeting, Trafficking for Forced Criminality, highlighting again that this is an issue that is touching many regions of the world. Specifically, the topic of online scamming was one that I addressed in an early warning communication to the government of Cambodia in September of 2022. And received a detailed response from Cambodia on the measures that were being taken. I think it's really important to highlight the scale of the human rights violations that were documented in that communication and that were subsequently followed up in multiple communications, as my colleague said, to other states in the ASEAN region and to ASEAN itself. At that time, in September of 2022, in the communication to Cambodia, we highlighted that there were an estimated 100,000 victims of trafficking in Sinakulville city alone, who had been trafficked for the purposes of forced criminality, forced labour and sexual exploitation. We also alleged that there were an estimated 4,000 additional victims of trafficking for forced criminality and forced labour identified in a compound in Phnom Penh. And it's important to note the serious human rights violations occurring in addition to trafficking for forced criminality. These included in this allegation letter trafficking for the provision of illegal sexual services, sexual exploitation, as well as physical violence, brutality, arbitrary detention, and food rationing. Physical and sexual and psychological abuse, particularly affecting those who were detained, and our documentation identified children, as well as minoritized victims and those who were from indigenous communities. Serious reports, incredible reports of sexual violence, including gang rape, were received, as well as reports relating to extrajudicial summary or arbitrary executions of victims of trafficking. which were allegedly falsely reported to law enforcement authorities as suicides. It was also alleged that those who escaped were not being provided with the kind of specialized assistance and protection that was needed and which they have a right to under international and regional human rights law. So that led to the further communications. We have received some responses. We've had follow-on significant work with the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights and with ASEAN. But we see that there is much work that needs to be done. And I want to highlight just brief points in relation to trafficking for forced criminality. It puts to the test our ability to provide a human rights-based response, to protect the victims who are often wrongly perceived as perpetrators. And at the core of the human rights-based response must be the non-punishment principle. That is highlighted in the object and purpose of the Palermo Protocol. It's repeatedly been highlighted by UN treaty bodies as an obligation arising under the Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, Article 8, arising under CEDAW, under the Convention on the Rights of the Child, and other human rights treaties. Non-punishment requires us to identify victims early. It requires early identification, because without that, we end up with wrongful prosecution of those who, in fact, should be assisted and protected in recovery. And I want to highlight that identification of victims is a positive obligation on states, not one that is dependent on self-identification. And that requires engagement with all relevant actors, all law enforcement authorities, migration authorities, but also those engaged in the provision of health services, who may be first responders, who can often be those who may identify persons at risk of trafficking or victims of trafficking and assist and refer them for services and protection. And by assistance and protection, we mean the provision of safe long-term accommodation, protection against reprisals, the provision of psychosocial assistance, medical assistance, health services, including reproductive and health and sexual health services, and also legal aid to ensure effective access to justice. We also mean reintegration and rehabilitation over a long term. We also need to address the status of victims who may be in an irregular migration status, for example, and they may have a right to asylum or to another form of international protection, and certainly protection against refoulement. Where voluntary returns take place, there needs to be follow-up in terms of assistance and protection services to protect against reprisals and risks of re-trafficking. That is also essential to effective investigations, facilitating and ensuring victim participation in investigations and effective access to remedies. And to conclude, I just want to highlight an important development in 2025, which was the launch of the ASEAN guidelines on the implementation of the non-punishment principle for the protection of victims of trafficking, launched by the ASEAN Intergovernmental Commission on Human Rights, the ASEAN Senior Officials Meeting on Transnational Crime, with the support of the Australian government-funded ASEAN Australia Counter-Trafficking Programme. And the launch of the guidelines mark a really significant milestone in terms of regional efforts to strengthen victim protection, particularly important in the context of online scamming and the very serious human rights violations that we are seeing. And the guidelines provide very practical direction to states on how to implement the non-punishment principle. We've also seen regional developments elsewhere, including important judgments from the European Court of Human Rights, for example, from the African Commission on Human and People's Rights, highlighting that failure to respect the non-punishment principle may also lead to violations of the right to a fair trial, because it undermines effective investigations and fair trial procedures, failing to ensure non-punishment principles in the context of trafficking for forced criminality. And I want to reiterate the comments of the Deputy High Commissioner that the non-punishment principle extends to all forms of punishment, including administrative sanctions, status-related punishments relating to migration status, as well as arrest, detention and deportations. And the non-punishment also applies to all offences committed as a direct consequence of being trafficked, regardless of the seriousness of those offences. And that is a challenge for states and a challenge for law enforcement authorities and for judicial processes. But it requires all justice sector actors to be fully engaged, to respect and ensure recognition of the non-punishment principle. And I want to note that failure to identify and assist and protect victims also undermines effective investigations, because it means that states and law enforcement authorities are pursuing the wrong persons, the victims, not the perpetrators. So they are not ensuring accountability. And effective investigations require victim and witness protection, long-term protection against reprisals, and effective access to justice, including for victims with disabilities who require reasonable accommodations as mandated by international human rights law and the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, and requires effective access to justice for children, including child-friendly justice in line with the CRC. Accountability requires effective access to remedies, compensation for victims of a serious crime and a serious human rights violation. And we must see effective, proportionate and dissuasive sanctions. We also, as the seminar is highlighting, need to see effective legal cooperation, including through mutual legal assistance measures and expanded forms of jurisdiction to ensure that we do not have gaps in terms of accountability due to limited and unduly restricted forms of jurisdiction. We also need to enhance capacity for investigations of cybercrimes, and that is often limited in states where there may be limited capacity, facilities, resources, knowledge and specialism to investigate and prosecute for the kinds of sophisticated crimes that we are seeing in the context of trafficking for online scamming. And we need more partnerships with the private sector, with big tech, to utilize their resources to effectively prevent these serious crimes and serious human rights violations, but also to ensure accountability and to put victims at the centre and ensure effective access to justice. To conclude, we need to see survivor-centred and survivor-led approaches, recognising the intersectional impacts of this serious crime and serious human rights violation, taking into account the gender dimension. Men and boys are often overlooked as victims of trafficking. Women and girls often suffer and endure serious sexual violence and sexual exploitation accompanying trafficking for forced criminality. And we also see that victims with disabilities are targeted in the context of forced criminality. And that is something that I've highlighted in a joint policy brief with the Special Rapporteur on the rights of persons with disabilities. Trafficking for forced criminality is a particular form of trafficking that persons with disabilities are targeted for. The relevance of race and ethnicity is also highlighted in our communications, where we see that minoritized groups and Indigenous peoples are also targeted in online scamming. So thank you again. I think we see that the willingness of states to cooperate, as is evident here today, the willingness of civil society to continue to advocate for victims, as well as the testimonies of victims and survivors, will ensure that we have the capacity to respond effectively if we continue to cooperate. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Special Rapporteur, for your comprehensive presentation, especially concerning the importance of prevention and early identification. And also, I would like to underline the need to ensure appropriate support for victims and also the respect for the principle of non-punishment. I now invite Ms. Pia Oberoi, Senior Human Rights Officer of OHCHR. So, Ms. Oberoi, you have the floor now.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, DHC, Special Rapporteurs, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. As you've heard, in February 2026, OHCHR published a detailed report on the human rights impacts of the cyber scam operations, and you'll find that report on our website accompanied by an interactive story map. We titled our report A Wicked Problem. This terminology describes a complex issue that is hard to solve because of its interconnected causes, competing stakeholder interests, and the absence of a single definitive solution. The complex crisis that we are discussing today exemplifies such a wicked problem. People seeking low and medium wage employment are particularly at risk of fraudulent recruitment into the operations, with estimates that some 300,000 people from multiple countries have been drafted into scam operations in the Mekong region alone. Ladies and gentlemen, recent law enforcement activities in Southeast Asia have resulted in arrests and deportations, and in some cases, large-scale release of workers from scam operations. Bilateral and multilateral agreements for joint rescues, as well as a series of sanctions on individuals and organized criminal groups, have been instituted by states individually and in cooperation. We welcome law enforcement efforts that result in predictable rescues, in rights-based responses, and in effective prosecution of perpetrators, including at the highest levels of these criminal networks. Here it is important to note that the 4 Ps that guide anti-trafficking efforts, protection, prevention, prosecution, and partnership, are interconnected elements of a comprehensive and holistic solution. Responses focused only on law enforcement crackdowns, for instance, will not result in sustainable change nor effective accountability for victims. In our research, which was undertaken through a human rights lens and centered on the lived experience of survivors, we sought to illuminate the protection and prevention elements of this crisis, as well as the important need for effective international cooperation. On protection, the treatment endured by individuals within the context of scam operations is extremely alarming. According to the testimony of victims, the scam operations are sites of serious human rights abuse. High levels of psychological and physical violence have been reported in compounds where brutality is seemingly the norm. Even in those cases where people entering the compounds, knowing that they would be expected to conduct online fraud or other illicit activity, most were not aware that they would be detained inside the centers and subjected to torture and ill treatment. Rescue or escape from scam compounds didn't necessarily mark the end of human rights concerns. Our research found, for example, that in contravention of the non-punishment principle, nearly 70% of the survivors that we interviewed had been subject to official penalties such as detention and criminal or immigration charges. Many described stigma and economic hardship and living with complex mental and physical trauma after their release, including chronic illness, depression, anxiety, post-traumatic stress disorder, nightmares, and severe insomnia. Protection interventions need to be scaled up and focused on joined-up screening and identification, which should lead to meaningful protection pathways rather than summary returns and deportations. There is also a particularly urgent need for torture and trauma rehabilitation through cross-border referrals where needed. Rather than facing disbelief, stigmatization, and further punishment, victims require protection, care, and rehabilitation, as well as pathways to justice and redress. I will now turn to prevention. In our research, we used a behavioral science lens to answer this critical question. Years after the alarm was first raised by OHCHR, by civil society and human rights mechanisms, why are people continuing to be fraudulently recruited into cyber scam operations? To answer this question, we used both quantitative and qualitative investigative methodologies and centered the testimony of survivors as a diagnostic tool. We started from the position that understanding how and why people make the decisions that they make can help explain why they take what could be considered to be unexpected or undesirable choices. Cognitive biases, such as overconfidence bias, which leads people to overestimate their control over situations, prevents them from taking what would customarily be considered rational decisions. This led us to 3 interconnected findings. Firstly, our research found that most survivors were under severe socioeconomic pressures to pay off familial debts, to send children to school, or afford medical treatment for elderly parents. And more than half were unemployed or underemployed at the time of recruitment. Facing stagnating prospects at home in a global context of accelerating inequalities and fragile job creation, as well as slowing growth and high debt burdens, many sought to move away to urban areas or across borders in search of stable jobs and decent work. Under this pressure, individuals felt that they had few alternative options when making the recruitment decision. Secondly, trust emerged as a key consideration in recruitment decision-making, with nearly 3/4 of survivors reporting being recruited through a trusted source that was personally known to them, including family members, childhood friends, co-workers, and community acquaintances. As one survivor told us, "I was recruited by a friend who had been my neighbor for 5 years. He told me that if I took the job, I would be able to provide the support that my disabled father needed." Thirdly, Recruitment into these scam operations is taking place along pathways that are operating in parallel to establish labor migration, both internally and across borders. As has been long recognized, recruitment into low and medium wage labor sectors is often unregulated and characterized by exploitative and fraudulent recruitment practices, including a structural dependence on multiple layers of intermediaries. In such a context, where people are urgently seeking livelihood opportunities, in a context where they are being recruited by trusted intermediaries, and within circumstances that look very similar to normalized recruitment channels, they are unlikely or even unable to distinguish easily between legitimate pathways to labor migration on the one hand and illicit pathways into trafficking and exploitation on the other. This leaves them at high risk of predatory and fraudulent recruitment practices, both offline and online. As one survivor we interviewed explained, I thought I was being offered a work opportunity that was normal for young people seeking to migrate and earn money abroad. Ladies and gentlemen, in the context of these scam operations, individual choices revealed through behavioral insights are being shaped, reinforced, and constrained by wider social, economic, and governance structures within which these choices are embedded. Our research found that socioeconomic drivers, reinforced by cognitive biases, consistently override individual-level knowledge barriers, indicating that awareness raising or knowledge provision campaigns alone are unlikely to produce effective change. Our research makes clear that powerful systemic factors are facilitating fraudulent recruitment into these violent and coercive scam operations. Holistic and rights-based solutions must therefore include increasing the availability and accessibility of safe labor migration pathways, including through enhancing transparency and accountability in recruitment, improving the oversight of online recruitment by the social media platforms that host these fraudulent job postings, embedding the non-punishment principle in law and policy responses, including through ensuring non-discrimination in screening and identification of victims, and addressing corruption and impunity, including through protecting civic space and the important work of independent media, human rights defenders, and civil society actors. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, in conclusion, our research and long-standing cooperation with states and stakeholders has revealed that these scam operations are embedded within systemic weaknesses in political economies, including entrenched socioeconomic inequalities, deficits and coordination gaps in labor migration governance, as well as challenges related to collusion, corruption, and impunity. We cannot expect that interventions related solely to law enforcement or to generic awareness raising will result in durable and rights-based solutions. It is only through taking a victim-centered lens, as has been mentioned before, and through the prism of international cooperation that we can hope to find enduring and just resolution of this wicked problem. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Beroy, for presenting the key findings and recommendations of your report. So now I invite our final panelist, Ms. Ling Lee, who is joining us virtually to share civil society perspectives on this issue based upon her expertise. Ms. Lee.
Thank you. Can I have my slides, please? Okay, great. All right. So thank you, Mr. Ambassador Yun and Excellencies and other distinguished guests and then OHCHR colleagues for having me here today. So I'm co-founder of EOS Collective. We are an NGO working on investigating scam industry and providing survivor support related to trafficking for forced criminality in Southeast Asia. So through this work, we engage closely with victims and frontline organizations across different countries in Southeast Asia, which provides insight into the protection challenges surrounding this issue. Next slide, please. So while victims of online scam operations are globally dispersed, research shows that these activities tend to be concentrate in specific geography clusters rather than being evenly distributed worldwide. So this suggests that local social, economic, and political conditions shape where this industry developed. So documented clusters include Brazil, Turkey, parts of West Africa, Eastern Europe, parts of South Asia, and most recently, Southeast Asia. So these clusters have history being associated with different type of fraud. For example, West Africa is famous for the Nigerian prince scam. Romanian has been associated with online auction fraud, while ethnic Chinese operators in Southeast Asia are often credited with the so-called as pig butchering, official impersonate scams, tax scams, and other type of investment fraud. So why give this global picture is like we are now seeing some unclear interaction between these clusters. For example, Nigerian scammers appearing in Southeast Asia and Chinese-linked networks expanding activities in Africa and South America. So we need to pay attention to this possible convergence of criminal ecosystem. But what make Southeast Asia so different? So first, it presents the most recent and large-scale model of cyber-enabled fraud. So scam operations in Southeast Asia have developed into highly industrial system that combine digital fraud with organized labor exploitation, as already reported by other panelists. And what I want to emphasize today is like the second thing, the business model in Southeast Asia is highly mobile. So these operations originated in Taiwan and mainland China, but as law enforcement pressure increased, so they relocated across the region from Cambodia to Myanmar to Laos, and then further as enforcement intensified, this mobility allows network to quickly adapt and relocate. We already see that after the crackdown in North Myanmar, scam centers moved to Myawaddy. And after crackdown in the Philippines, it increased in Cambodia, and it's constantly searching for new ground. And then one other important thing is like the both perpetrator and victims now become, they come from like a wide range of nationalities. So while Chinese criminal syndicates still dominate the industry, we now see other nationalities like Indonesian, Malaysian, Pakistanis taking more management role, and people from the US, Europe, Japan, Korea are seen doing scams side by side with those criminal groups. And at the same time, of course, the workers are trafficked into the scam compound originate from many different regions. This complicates jurisdiction, victim identification, and international cooperation. So what do we see here? After all the crackdown in the past years, scam operations instead expanded. Next slide, please. So here are the two images showing the expansion of compound. I choose one in Cambodia and one in Myanmar. You can see the forest turn construction sites, and then they turn to scam centers. And then it's still growing in February 2026. So we are not seeing it to end soon. Next slide, please. So this pure crackdown strategy also bring other problems. We already know that these operations extract value from labor at every stage. Individuals are trafficked to perform scam work. And if they attempt to leave, families are often pressured to pay the ransom. And if the payment cannot be made, workers may be resold between compounds as tradable asset. And this model function under any crackdown, because crackdown may disrupt specific sites, but then this model makes sure scam center can move easy and still not cost a lot of money. Worst scenario, they can just rob the workers off and throw them on the street. And it was exactly what happened in Cambodia and Myanmar during recent enforcement pressure. Victims we spoke with described that they are giving like two options. So either relocate with the company to another location or leave, but without any money and documentations. And leaving the compound did not automatically translate into protection. I want to take what happened now in Cambodia as example. So in January this year, thousands of victims fled scam center in Cambodia after government crackdown operation. Among them, there are more than 2,500 Indonesians, more than 10,000 Chinese, more than like 3,000 of Africans from different countries, among other nationalities. It includes like women who had experienced sexual abuse, minors and babies with their survivor mother, individuals with long-term injuries resulting from violence inside the compound, asylum seekers, all left without money and have no access to basic needs as shelter, sanitary products, and food. And after 1.5 months of this crisis, we still do not have any protection mechanism, and many of them are still on the street. So situations like this illustrate what we describe as an enforcement protection gap. Enforcement mechanism may be activated, but protection mechanisms are not positioned at the same scale. So in this context, civil society organizations often observe much of the immediate operation pressure. NGOs like us are providing emergency shelter, transportation, and case coordination while working with embassies to facilitate repatriations. But we're talking about like thousands of people, and only 2 or 3 organizations on the ground are doing it. These efforts are being carried out with limited resources, with high risk, because those people are not seen as victim by the government. There's no victim identification happening right now. So this approach is not sustainable at all. And importantly, this is not about attributing blame to any single country. The challenges involved are complex and transnational, but the pattern suggests that while enforcement pressure on scam center has increased significantly, but the protection planning has not evolved at the same pace for the past few years. And lacking protection has consequences. Individuals who escape exploitation may be vulnerable to recruitment, and we have testimonies told us that they have been reached by scammers, promising them that they can go back to work and earn their flight ticket and return home. And they are actually doing so. So what we are doing here is just pushing those victims to go back to their scam centers. Next slide, please. So these are the testimonies I got in the past 2 weeks, and people just cannot survive. One of these 3 just went back to the scam center. Next slide. So we need cooperation from all levels more than any time. First is about operational cooperation. So when enforcement action occur, we have to have a protection. So this requires pre-agreed protocol between UN agencies, civil society, and embassies who provide temporary shelter, who covers emergency medical needs, who funds and coordinate repatriation. This role should not be negotiated after individuals are on the street. And then victim identification. Without formal identification as victim of human trafficking or forced criminality, many organizations are not even able to provide any access support. So at the same time, victim identification process can also contribute to investigation. And that is the area we also need cooperation between grassroots NGOs and UN agencies and law enforcement. Survivor testimonies often provide valuable information about recruitment network, scam operations, the strategies the scammers are using to target the country they wanted to scam, and the recent change in the industry. So this information can support more targeted investigations and stronger prosecution, serving justice for both trafficking victims and those harmed by those online scams. And the crime model is cross-border, and recruitment often happen in one country, transits through another, exploitation in the third, and financial flows through multiple jurisdictions. So without a structured cross-border data sharing mechanism, enforcement just remains reactive. And then the ecosystem responsibility. This issue does not sit solo within the criminal justice system. Online platform host recruitment content, airline transport, groups along repeated high risk routes, and financial institutes process suspicious transactions. So regional bodies shape regulatory environments. So if cooperation is limited to bilateral laws, this bilateral enforcement exchange, the structure driver remain intact. So when we speak of cooperation, we are not speaking of like ad hoc communication. We are speaking of coordinated, multi-layered activation. Only then can enforcement and protection evolve at the same speed. The last slide, please. So I just want to conclude the final point is, until today, individuals they're escaping scam compound are often labeled as irregular migrants, overstayers, or perpetrators of scam. I'm not denying the willing scammers, but those in most vulnerable situations and need help are often victims of human trafficking. So let's call them who they are and protect them properly. Let's not push them to the side of crime. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation, especially on the importance of the cooperation. Now we are slightly behind the schedule, but I thank the distinguished panelists for the presentation of their insightful views. And I will now open the floor for the questions and comments. First for those on the room, and then those on WebEx. So, yeah. Okay, I'll give the floor to Thailand first.
Well, thank you for the comprehensive. Thank you for the comprehensive discussion, which highlighted the urgent need to tackle this global problem. Thailand is very proud to conspire this very important event at this and very, very timely indeed. Let me just share a few points from the view of Thailand. For us, this scam issue is a problem that is both immediate and very real. Many scam centers actually are located outside our borders. And over time, we began to see that these criminal networks are using Thailand as a transit country. So as a frontline country, we have placed the fight against online scams and trafficking in persons as a top national agenda. The Royal Thai Police has established an operational task force based on a whole of government and a whole of society approach. We have also put in place a national referral mechanism to provide appropriate protection and assistance to victims in accordance with the trauma-informed and victim-centered approaches and the principle of non-punishment. And just to give you some numbers also, last year we have assisted international organizations, foreign embassies, civil society to repatriate over 13,000 victims from more than 40 countries from scam centers in neighboring countries of Thailand. And with the IOM, we have also developed the consular guidelines for vulnerable migrants and potential victims of trafficking, which are used by embassies and partners to provide consular support and assistance. And as the concept note has elaborated, in December last year, the Thai government, together with the UNODC, has organized the International Conference on the Global Partnership Against Online Scams. We adopted the 2025 Bangkok Joint Statement, which is a collective political will to strengthen international cooperation to move towards a more coordinated and timely global response in all 5 areas, which is persecution, prevention, protection, policy, and partnership. And we were very happy that Mr. Volker could participate online. This was also an important discussion during my foreign minister's visit last year in December, and also in January this year, they had discussed on the issue as well. So Thailand, going forward, we will continue this fight and to advance this cooperation at various global forums coming up, such as the Global Fraud Summit later in Vienna. My foreign minister will be heading that delegation as well. And Thailand, will be hosting the EU-Thailand for ASEAN Regional Seminar on Scam Fighting in April in Bangkok to deepen cooperation between Southeast Asia and Europe to address the operational and policy gaps of this. Thank you.
Thank you for your very detailed explanation. I have 5 more the delegation on my list, so I hope that you can make relatively short remarks. Next speaker is Vietnam, to be followed by Australia, UK, Peru, and Tanzania. Vietnam, you have the floor.
Thank you, Excellency. Vietnam thanks the Republic of Korea and the OHCHR for organizing this timely and important side event, which we are very pleased to co-sponsor. We fully share the concern that online scams have become a grave human rights challenge requiring urgent and coordinated international action. Vietnam has experienced firsthand the human toll of online scam operations. In response, we have undertaken comprehensive efforts to across legislation, capacity building, public awareness, and law enforcement. On the legislative front, Vietnam enacted a new law on prevention and combat of trafficking in person in 2024, which explicitly addresses trafficking for the purpose of forcing the commission of criminal acts and provides protection for victims who committed unlawful acts as a direct consequences of being trafficked. A new national program on prevention and combat of trafficking in persons for 2026 to 2030 also has been adopted. On capacity building, Vietnam has intensified training for law enforcement and prosecutorial authority with a focus on collecting and processing electronic evidence in trafficking investigations, applying technology in countering high-tech crime, and handling organized and transnational cases involving online scams. On communications and awareness, Vietnam launched several nationwide campaigns, and in partnership with the IOM, we organized the event called Think Before You Click in December 2025 to equip students with skills to stay safe in the digital environment. We also coordinated with the UNODC and UNICEF on the campaign Not Alone, Safe Online Together. On international cooperation, Vietnam actively engages in the Bali process on people smuggling, trafficking in persons, and related transnational crime, and coordinated the Mekong Ministerial Initiative Against Trafficking. In November 2025, Vietnam hosted the 6th ministerial meeting of the COMMIT process, which adopted a sub-regional plan of action for the next 10 years. We also participated in Interpol's Operation Stormmakers 3 and implemented the Mekong Lansang Safe 2025 campaign together with other countries in the region. These efforts are yielding results, though much work remains, and Vietnam stands ready to continue sharing experiences and work with all partners to strengthen the global response to online scams and protect the human rights of all victims. Thank you.
Thank you, Vietnam. Now I'll give the floor to Australia.
Thank you, Excellency. Australia is also pleased to co-sponsor this event and welcomes the timely discussion on the fastest growing and least understood dimension of human trafficking. Trafficking for forced criminality undermines the regional and global peace, security, and resilience. We also commend OHCHR's report, Wicked Problem, for advancing understanding of this rapidly evolving issue. And we thank the special rapporteurs for their vital work and advocacy. The figures we've heard today highlight both the acute impact and the global reach of these criminal networks, which thrive on corruption, weak governance, and instability. Trafficking into online scam centres demands a victim survivor-centred approach. As we've heard, without proper victim identification upon release and safe repatriation pathways, enforcement crackdowns risk driving further displacement and re-trafficking, especially in conflict-affected areas where non-state actors operate with impunity. Australia takes a multi-sectoral approach, spanning prevention, protection, disruption, prosecution, cyber capability, and illicit finance action to counter these operations. We also work closely with civil society, law enforcement, the UN, and the private sector. As co-chair of the Bali process with Indonesia, Australia is working to strengthen practical cooperation across the region, including through the Bali Process Regional Support Office, which helps countries respond more effectively to trafficking and related crimes. We are also deepening our partnership with ASEAN by providing targeted capacity building and supporting victim-centred approaches through the ASEAN-Australia Counter-Trafficking Program, including our work to promote the non-punishment principle so that victim survivors are supported rather than penalised. We encourage all partners to strengthen mechanisms to improve overwhelmed victim identification systems, ensure cross-border and law enforcement collaboration, expand open intelligence sharing, and step up illicit finance action. Only a coordinated international response and multi-sector approach will meet the scale of the challenge before us. Thank you.
Thank you. Now the UK has the floor.
Thank you, Ambassador. I'll just start by showing my gratitude to the Republic of Korea for organising this event. The UK is very pleased to be among the co-sponsors. And a special thanks to all the panellists who each delivered very interesting interventions and have highlighted how global this problem is. We all recognise the seriousness of this problem, and we're now faced with increasingly complex and growing forms of exploitation. As panellists said, victims are trafficked globally and between regions through an increasing number of international routes. And we also recognise that technology plays a prominent role and forced criminality, including to work in scam centres, which now ranks third in terms of the number of trafficking victims detected globally. I'll just share a few points from the UK's perspective. The UK is committed to tackling all forms of modern slavery, forced labour and human trafficking, and cyber scam centres represent a growing security and human rights issue impacting thousands of people. That is why the UK is working closely with international partners to strengthen law enforcement capacity, improve victim support and reintegration, and apply targeted sanctions against the criminal organisations driving these operations. We are supporting the OECE to conduct research using open source intelligence to investigate the spread of online scamming operations. And we're also supporting UNODC and Interpol to deliver a global fraud summit on the 16th to 17th of March in Vienna, which will bring together member states, law enforcement, private sector, and civil society to strengthen the global response to fraud, including scam centres. The UK believes that international cooperation, including better use of existing mechanisms such as Interpol channels, is essential to enhancing the effectiveness of anti-scam centre initiatives. Finally, closer cooperation between UN agencies is vital. For example, the ILO's work in Myanmar helps educate workers vulnerable to exploitation about their fundamental rights, including freedom from forced labour. This is an example of where coordinated engagement could make a real difference. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker is Peru.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. And allow me first to congratulate you for bringing this initiative and bringing us around the table to discuss this very important topic. The conversation is timely, and we have heard the panelists, and we thank for that, for depicting in a very detailed manner the consequences for the human rights perspective. As Peru, we pay special attention to this phenomenon. We believe that it undermines public trust, digital security, and the rule of law at the global level. I think the fact that it is a transnational threat also means that we have to cooperate. It has to be addressed through clear rules, of course, but most importantly, through cooperation and effective multilateral mechanisms based on the respect of international law, but also, of course, human rights. Also, we have participated in the negotiation. We support the UN Convention on Cybercrime. We have also participated in the International Conference on the Global Alliance Against Online Scams, held recently in Thailand. All of this with the hope that we can build a predictable, coherent, and rule-based international order that enables states to prevent, to investigate, and to punish cybercrime while guaranteeing fundamental freedoms. We just like to point two topics that came out of the discussion. One is regarding the victim center, and we very much support that idea. I mean, thank you so much for bringing the testimonies. I think that was very important for us to really see how much damage can cause this crime, and also the prevention part. We very much agree that it is not only a valuable path to follow, but in a context of budget constraints, we also believe that it's economically smart to follow that path of prevention. So just to point out those two elements. And thank you so much again, Ambassador.
Thank you. Our final speaker in this room is from Tanzania. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairperson. Tanzania, first of all, commends the Republic of Korea for organizing this event. And Tanzania, as others have said, that the issue of online scams is one of the challenges, legal challenges, that we have been facing time and again. But we have the legal framework in Tanzania relating to the offenses relating to online scams. We have the Cyber Crimes Act, but the other pieces of legislation that they tend also to combat such kind of issues. But again, we have formed in Tanzania a special task force dealing with the issues of anti-human trafficking, which is managed in the cooperation between the Office of Director of Public Prosecution, that is National Prosecution Service, and the Office of Director of Criminal Investigation with other stakeholders. And one of the issues that we normally deal with using that task force, issues relating to anti-human trafficking. And we have managed, of course, to some extent to combat such kind of crimes. But the other things that in most of these technical the offenses in a manner that they are committed, we normally use the system of having standard operating procedures in investigation and prosecution of such offenses. Because sometimes, as one of the panelists who pointed out the issue of training and trying to reform our legal frameworks, but sometimes it's very difficult to put each and everything in a piece of registration. But the form of using standard operating procedures in our country has, in one way or another, assisted us to combat these crimes and making it possible in the issue of investigation and prosecution. So you'll find that you prepare the standard operating procedures for that purpose. But the issue of capacity building, we are trying our level best to investigators and prosecutors. But again, we expect to have the conference of the East Africa Prosecutors Association in May. And one of the topics that we are going to discuss is the issue relating to online scams. Of course, cyber crimes in general, and of course, issue relating to human trafficking. But we are going also to put that emphasis on international cooperation. And this is very important, as we have to put our hands together, because sometimes we can emphasize the issue of cooperation, but sometimes we tend to differ depending on the historical background of legal systems that we are having. And sometimes also depends on the socioeconomic development of that particular jurisdiction and the political setup. So having the conference that like that one that we're going to have, we are going to share a number of issues relating to our daily activities, including those legal issues relating to online scams. Thank you very much once again, Mr. Chairperson.
Okay, thank you. We have one more speaker on the online. So now I give the floor to the OSCE. You have been waiting for such a long time. Now you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Chair, and thank you very much for organizing this important event. The OSCE approach to combating human trafficking, including for forced criminality and specifically for scamming, is very consistent with the approach that panelists have outlined. But I will very briefly use this time to share a couple of areas in particular that we are working on right now that I think will be of broader interest. As Ms. Lee said, the scam operations themselves are expanding both in geographic scope as well as the home countries of the victims where they're being targeted. Recent reports indicate that, unfortunately, the growing risks of cyber scam operations within the OSCE region itself are also growing. Both the citizens that are being trafficked into cyber scam operations in Southeast Asia, but also that cyber scam operations have been detected in several parts of the OSCE region. So in November 2025, my office at the OSCE launched a research study on the patterns of trafficking for forced criminality into cyber scam operations in the OSCE region so that we could provide evidence-based support to the OSCE participating or member states. The research findings will be launched at the forthcoming 26th Alliance Against Trafficking Conference on the 20th and 21st of April, which will focus on forced criminality, as Special Rapporteur Mullally mentioned. I'll share with you a couple of the preliminary findings of this research very briefly. First is that criminals within the OSCE region are targeting young adults, generally under 30 or 35 years old, often with limited work experience, through posting attractive job ads in several social media platforms, not only Facebook and Telegram, but also WhatsApp and LinkedIn. We are observing ads that are explicitly targeting young women with requests for photos and videos during the job application process. We've also observed several OSCE languages that are specifically being emphasized, including Russian, Turkish, and Portuguese, suggesting the intended targets for the financial victims. I also wanted to share that our work on the financial data related to investigating scam operations, we will launch cryptocurrency guidance on the 16th of March on the margins of the Global Fraud Summit that was just recently mentioned. Because we are tracking related data in our work in the follow the money approach with a focus on virtual assets. As Special Rapporteur Obokata noted, financial investigations are critical in combating all forms of human trafficking, but especially in the area of forced scamming. A report by Chain Analysis, which is a blockchain technology company that came out only yesterday, shows that crypto flows linked to suspected human trafficking have surged sharply in 2025, reaching hundreds of millions of dollars. They documented an 85% year-over-year increase. So our research at the OSCE confirms that a combined monitoring approach is essential, since these criminal networks increasingly blend with legitimate businesses and professional laundering services. So as others have said, the importance of partnerships and collaboration with the private sector, including blockchain analytics, really are needed to work alongside traditional anti-trafficking actors and public awareness efforts to prevent and tackle this form of trafficking. Thank you very much again for the chance to briefly outline some of what we're doing here at the OSCE.
Thank you very much for your presentation. I'm afraid that we already used up our time which are allowed to us today. So it's time for me to thank the panelists for sharing your views and insights with us. And I also thank our panel, the floor for involving constructively. So thank you very much for your constructive participation. Thank you. Bye-bye.